you doing, guys? Today, with the back feeling a little bit better, I am working on getting things lined up so I can just install the transmission torque tube into my 1955 Wheelhorse Senior. If you remember from prior videos, let me close all this junk out of the way. The gear case between the transmission and the torque tube, which is right here, was completely destroyed. This whole corner of the gear case must have broken off at some point in time, and you can see somebody went in there with brass and stick weld, and it's just an absolute disaster. That caused I'm going to take this with me because I'm going to show you something. That caused the plate that mounts the torque tube to the back of the gear case to be pretty warped. In a prior video, I straightened it out. I wanted to go ahead and just kind of recheck that all of this is lined up. It will meet nice and flat with the new gear case that I have. There's just maybe a millimeter of space between these two bolts and these two bolts. Nothing that a gasket and a little bit of sealer wouldn't fix. So I'm really happy with it. It fits nice and tight, or right up flat up against all the way the gear case all the way around the bottom. The gear case only gets filled with gear lube to about this position, so I don't think we're going to have any particular issue. One of the things I wanted to show you that I just brought over, this was the gasket that was originally between the torque tube and the gear case. Yeah, you can see how thick this thing is. This is like literally like a piece of tire rubber. So instead of, fixing the situation, they just shoved a big, huge gasket between these two parts. I'm going to just use this gasket. I'm going to clean this all. I got to clean this thing all up again. And I'll just trace out a nice gasket. I think what I'm going to do, just to make the reassembly into the tractor easier, is I'm going to go ahead and just like 3M tack adhesive the gasket to the back of the torque tube. And then once I make this gasket, but better, I'll just 3M contact cement adhesive the gasket onto the back. So that way I'm not manhandling it and trying to get it to all line up. It'll be in place. The only thing I will do is I'll probably take a little bit of Durco sealer on the opposing side and just put a light coat on the gasket or on the gear case when I put the final assembly on it. You may ask, why do I have these nuts and bolts like this? It's only because these 5/16 hardened bolts are too long, and I just wanted to use these nuts to slowly just get it to tighten up onto the gear case. All right, so with all of that said, I'm going to go ahead and take this apart, clean it, trace it, and get those gaskets made. So I went ahead and hacked off a piece of gasket material, laid the tube on, traced it out. I decided that 1 inch would probably be the best thickness of the gasket. That gets me around all the bolts quite nicely. 1 inch this direction, 1 inch that direction. So I think that would be best. So I went ahead and also traced out 1 inch on the inner portion of it. So I'm going to go ahead and take the scissors, cut the outside. I'll take my utility knife here and cut the inside out. And that should get me the gasket that I'm looking for. I'll clean the gasket up, clean the base or the plate up, and then I'll contact cement the gasket in place. Once it sets, then I'll knock out the holes for the 5/16 bolts. For the opposing side, I just traced the outside, dropped a couple guidelines on the outer sides of where the bolts go in order to find some center lines between the bolts, and then I roughly was able to find the center of the drive shaft hole, which is right here. It worked out to be about like a 3-inch diameter circle would work, so I made this 1.5 inches, centered it, and then made the circle. I'm going to cut this out by hand with the scissors, and then I'll just take the utility knife and very carefully just kind of cut the center. I will knock the bolt holes out and make this drain slot in the gasket once I have it glued down to the torque tube. And yes, I'm doing this in my kitchen because it's cold, rainy, and crappy. I don't feel like being in the garage. The wife's not home. With the contact cement set, next thing is just to go ahead and trim down the gasket. Just get a good utility knife with a sharp blade, run the blade along the sides. It cuts it out real nice. For the holes, what I do is I'll take the end of the utility knife, I'll locate the hole with my finger, take the utility knife and really take the corner of it, which is round, and press right in there. And what it does is it makes a little indentation. You can go ahead, take the blade and then trace around. For this side, this is it. It's got the 6 bolts. I don't need there's no drain hole or nothing like that. But on the opposing side of the torque tube, I did get a nice sharp, blade, traced out the drain hole, or the drain back hole where the gear oil will go back into the pinion bearing. So like I said, for the bolt hole, I'll locate it with my finger. I'll take this, I'll push this in like that, and I think you can see that it gives you a nice little indentation where that is. Break out the blade, just kind of, without lopping your finger off, just kind of work the blade around. And because of the contact cement being set, you can kind of manhandle this and it'll be fine. And then there you go. Now I'll just go back and clean up the hole. I have 5 more to do, and then this guy is ready to install. I think to wrap this video up, the goal is to get the transmission back onto the engine. I'm going to pull the tractor out, get it in the center of the garage. I'm going to go get my floor jack. I might have to get a block of wood, something to get the transmission on the jack somewhere right here so I can line it up to the best of my abilities and slide it on in there. One thing that's kind of interesting, this is the original pilot bushing that was in the crank. I'm just going to reuse it. I was thinking about getting a new one, but this has a little bit of play in it, and I'll show you in a second. And I think it's just best just to reuse the old one. The thing that's kind of interesting is if I try to, the bushing goes on like super easy in one direction, but if I turn it around, it's tight. So obviously there's some wear on this side, or, it rocks just a hair, but there's some play where this thing slides on real nice. I definitely want to make sure that I put it in the crank in this position, so that way I have the best chance of this thing just sliding right in into the bushing. I'm going to go ahead and install this bushing down inside the crank there, and then I'm going to try to figure out how I'm going to get this transmission in line with the back of the engine. Well, it was right about here where I should have realized that I was making a huge mistake, like massive mistake. And what was that mistake? Let me tell you. In an upcoming video, you will see that I can't get the drive shaft and the torque tube back into my tractor. Yeah, that's a problem. I won't go into it all. You'll see it in the next video. But basically what has to happen, I have to pull apart my entire banjo rear end. Not the case halves, but I got to take apart this entire gear case again, that entire gear case, in order to get to the bolts, these 4 bolts that hold the gear case to the frame, because I need to back this thing out, the rear end out, put the drive shaft, put the torque tube, and then slide the banjo back on in order to get the slip yoke back together. Yeah! Nothing like going 15 steps back in order to just return to the exact spot you were at. Once I got the splines of the input shaft lined up with the clutch disc splines, it slid right in and it seated itself all the way down. I'm going to take I just got 2 bolts just barely finger tight. And it is sitting on the jack, but I just want to make sure that there isn't, like, you know, a lot of weight hanging off just the engine bolts there. But for right now, wow. That actually went on pretty good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get 2 bolts. I'm going to get a couple bolts actually seated into the bell housing. And then I'm going to pull that inspection window off and just kind of look down inside. Make sure there's nothing. I mean, it just slid right in, but I wanted to make sure that there's nothing stupid going on. Or at least nothing visually on the surface. Let's take a look at what we got going on in there. Everything looks really good. Now, the throw-up bearing is quite far from the fingers of the clutch, or the pressure plate, I should say. Not a big deal. We're going to have plenty of adjustment to get that over. One thing that's really cool is if you see right in front of the throw-up bearing, there's that slide, or the slide for the throw-up bearing. It's just a hair, or maybe an 1/8 of an inch from the actual clutch disc. So that's perfect clearance. It's fully engaged in the pilot bearing, and obviously the splines, the 10 splines, are splined into the clutch disc perfectly. So, wow. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and torque this down, or torque those bolts in. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'll look at the schematic. Whatever a 3/8 bolt is, I'll just torque it to whatever the yield is for a grade 5 bolt. I got a grade 8 bolt, but I'm not going to go bananas with it. Maybe 20 foot-pounds. I think that might be it. But let me take a look, and we'll button this up, because that is some great progress in my opinion. So I pulled out my SEA bolt and torque specifications. This is just general kind of information. A 3/8 bolt, grade 5. Non-lubricated is like 26 foot-pounds. That's what they kind of call for the max. Grade 8 dry is 46. I'm not doing them 46 foot-pounds. There's no need for that. I just want to know that they are evenly torqued. So I'll probably just do them like 20 foot-pounds. That should be sufficient for what we're doing here. If these bolts start to back out of the bell housing here, we have much bigger problems than the torque of the bolts itself. So let me do that, button it up, and we'll take a look at the final product. Transmission installed. I ended up torquing the bolts to 25 foot-pounds. I don't know, it just felt right. So they're all torqued in, ready to go. I showed you the alignment and clearance of the transmission to the clutch disc, to the throw-up bearing, to the pilot, all that stuff lines up perfectly. There is a rod that goes from the clutch pedal to the throw-up bearing, or I guess you would call it the clutch fork. There really isn't like a clutch fork, I guess, in this transmission, but there's a rod, there's an adjustment. That's where we'll take up the slack between the throw-up bearing and the pressure plate tangs. That's to come. We'll get to that when we get to that. Next up is getting the torque tube and the drive shaft back in place. And then essentially what I'm planning on doing is I'm going to unbolt the engine, slide it forward, install the the drive shaft, the torque tube, and then align the drive shaft with the gear teeth and this bearing down here, and then put the bolts in. I got to clean the hood stand. That has to be installed at the same time, but that's for another video. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. And if you could, please give it a thumbs up. YouTube absolutely hates my channel from the perspective that I'm just real small, right? I'm not Cletus McFarlane. I'm real small, and when I don't put a video up on a weekend, they just completely destroy my analytics. They put me at the bottom of the list, and it just takes forever for me to kind of regain what I had. So I'm not complaining. Just asking for your assistance if you would be so kind. All right. Until the next project, you guys have a great day. Thank you very much.